Hello, my name is Miriam, and this is my final essay on Toni Morrison's Beloved and its impact on our understanding of trauma. So, a little bit of insight into Beloved and Toni Morrison. She was basically the first Black woman to ever win the Nobel Prize in Literature. Beloved focuses on our main character called Sethe, who undeniably commits the horrific action of killing her baby infant, Beloved, many years ago to protect herself and her family from returning back to slavery shortly after she escapes it in the first place. Toni Morrison doesn't only write this fictiously. These events were actually inspired by a real woman named Margaret Garner who, like Sethe, kills her infant in order to protect her family from returning to slavery. Her purpose for this story was to confront slavery and confront the silence that's around it, because let's be honest, a lot of Black people's voices during slavery were misheard and often shoved away. This takes place during the aftermath of the Civil War. This is a braided narrative in which there is no singular person telling the whole story. We see glimpses of Sethe, Denver, Beloved, and Paul D, who talk about their experiences and their traumas and how they deal with it or not deal with it. So my focus is on fragmented memory and the disruption in our narratives. So, what is fragmented memory and how does it relate to trauma? Fragmented memory is basically the way traumatic events appear to us, whether knowingly or not. They are remembered in broken and disorderly pieces rather than a straight continuous story. Whenever you recall an event or any type of story, you usually remember the beginning, middle, and end. However, that isn't the case for fragmented memory. It's common that you feel strong emotions, miss details, or are back into sudden sensory flashbacks. And in literature, this can seem very different. This can seem disrupted. Sometimes you can't even rely on the actual story because the person themselves may not even know if it's true or not. So why is this important, and what does this have to do with Beloved? My thesis on Beloved and memory fragmentation is as above. Beloved by Toni Morrison exercises the concept of memory fragmentation by using sensory triggering events to showcase how trauma resurfaces when suppressed and how it appears in disoriented pieces rather than a straightforward narrative. This quote at the bottom from the very first page of Morrison's novel 124 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. And this basically showcases how Beloved's energy still haunts the narrative. Haunts the house in which Sethe resides in the house that she is essentially free. And it kind of shows how ironic it is that even though she is free from slavery, she isn't free from the guilt and the emotion that she feels for killing her child. Paul D is a prominent character in the novel, and here is a little glimpse of how memory fragmentation impacts him and his way of telling stories and acting with Sethe. Shortly after Paul D has intimacy with Sethe, he is brought back into a flashback into Sweet Home, the plantation in which Sethe also grew up in. Here on page 13, he talks about being near this tree called Brother, in which he hanged out with the other slave men, which includes Sixo and Sethe's husband, Hallie. Then we are brought back into the present, in which Paul D is kind of disappointed. He was let down after sleeping with Sethe, and appears a little glimpse that Sethe also has a little rememory, in which she said that she remembers her times with Hallie back at the Sweet Home plantation, which was kind of interesting to me. Paul D is then brought back into his past again, and he remembers about his time in Alpharetta, Georgia, where he was part of a chain gang and essentially was tortured and completely damaged, far more than what Sweet Home done to him, which is said by Morrison. And then once again, we are brought back into the present, in which he asks Sethe whether or not if it's okay for him to stay at 124, in which she replies yes. We also see Sethe's slavery past and how it's suppressed. Lilith Thempika talks about how gives us a deep analysis on how Beloved is written, and they tell us how the story unfolds through not only the memories from Sweet Home, but also the tree that she has on her back that is mentioned throughout the novel, and is depicted in the illustration below. And it's also talked about the river crossing, in the which Setha actually escaped slavery on the way to baby Suggs' house. A little excerpt from the novel says, is Paul D saying, "What about the tree on your back?" We're talking about a tree, which comes from the whoopings Setha received back at Sweet Home. And Setha kind of disremembers it. She kind of quickly briefs over it, and instead she talks about they took her milk, and they took her milk. The milk is very important because it kind of just shows how Setha only sees herself as a vessel for her children. She doesn't really have any sense of identity, especially after the death of her baby. She doesn't see herself as anybody else. She all in all just doesn't believe that anything, the tree doesn't matter, the whippings didn't matter, but we can see through the memories from Sweet Home, the Cherokee tree from Sweet Home, and the river crossing with white girl Amy. They are talked about kind of in disorderly functions, and it kind of reflects the way that Setha really remembers it, because she doesn't talk about it, so she suppresses all of that emotion. So how trauma shapes Setha's motherhood. Like my previous slide, we have Selfridge talking about how before Setha is forced to obey school teachers' orders back at Sweet Home. However, even though she has now escaped to freedom, she doesn't have the sense of self. She is 100% focused on her children, and nothing more and nothing less. An example of how memory fragmentation occurs for this particular section is when Paul D asks Setha for a child, and Setha responds, "Don't you think I'm too old to start that all over again?" This kind of takes back Setha back into her memories, back into her grief of her losing baby Beloved, and her just saying she cannot go through it again. She remembers all the traumatic things that happened to her, from crossing the river, from the men taking away her milk, and ultimately killing Beloved. All of those memories appear in disorderly, fragmented ways, and she just can't handle it. She doesn't think she can handle it one more time, and she's trying to get Paul D to understand that. Sweet Home and slavery effect on memory. Fabro has a very deep analysis of Beloved, and specifically during the part where Setha is telling Paul D what really happened at the misery when she killed Beloved. And Paul D basically says, "You got 2 feet, Setha, not 4." Showing that he is telling Setha that she's human and she should not be acting an animal. And once he says that, Setha is once again experiencing memory fragmentation and is brought back into her past, in which she remembers school teacher telling the children to write about Setha and write down her animal characteristics on one side and then her human ones on the other. And this brings her back to those horrific memories of slavery and how she was mistreated at Sweet Home by school teacher and everybody else. Setha is not liking it. She doesn't feel like she's being supported, and because she was suppressed all of that feeling, all of those actions, now she feels like she can't work, she can't do anything, and yeah. So as a conclusion, how do we understand Beloved more now that we talk about trauma fragmentation? Trauma fragmentation teaches us that once we suppress our emotions, the longer that we do it for, the more we aren't able to have this sense of freedom. We lose sense of identity, and it's important that we see ourselves not only for who we used to do, who we are, who we used to be, but rather what we can do moving forward. learning to process that trauma and learning to live it, and in a way move forward is the only way we can go ahead. Toni Morrison basically shows us how we must be the ones to take control of our lives, and trauma can't be the only thing that defines us. And here are just some quotes that were probably one of the best parts of the novel, in my opinion, where Paul D says this at the me and you, we got more yesterday than anybody. We need some kind of tomorrow. Meaning that they have a lot of memories, they have a lot of trauma in their past. However, that can't be what stops them. They have the present and the future to look forward to, and that's what really matters. And Setha is her best thing, not her children, not Paul D, not Hallie, her. She is her own person. She has her freedom that she fought so hard for, and she should not let any type of trauma affect the way that she decides to move on with her life. And here is my works cited page from a couple of scholarly works, including Toni Morrison's actual novel. And I just wanted to say thank you, Professor Turner, for allowing us to have a good term. I really like that you're passionate for what you do. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I tried a lot on the visuals and stuff, and I hope that you have a great term, a great break, and I hope that more students take your class, because all of your insight and all